When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. In this episode, we're joined by Sam Duckworth, sometimes known by the moniker Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly. Sam was first signed when he was about 20 years old. He's been making records since the noughties. He's played the main stage at Glastonbury and along the way inspired a lot of young musicians. He's also, in more recent times, become an industry savvy ambassador for a sort of alternative way of music biz thinking and has campaigned on behalf of organisations like the Music Venue Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Duckworth. Sam, hello.
Hello. Greetings from Southend.
Hello from Southend. Hello from the old stomping ground of Essex. How is it in Essex today? How is it down on the coast?
It's incredibly sunny.
Is it? I mean,
the population has doubled.
This is really going to date by the time this goes out, because we're recording this on a Tuesday when the weather's nice. By the time you actually get to hear this, dear listeners, it's probably poor. It's teeming it down where you are, possibly. Anyway, listen, thank you for giving up some time for us, because there's an awful lot we wanted to talk to you about if we can fit all this in, including obviously your own music career, what you've learned along the way, how the industry has changed, and some new ideas about how musicians can now take control of their art more. And if we can fit it in, as I say, some thoughts possibly on the government-backed, the idea of a government-backed fan-led review of the music industry and all sorts of other stuff, I'm sure, which will crop up along the way. Before we do all that, though, and we look at the current landscape and look ahead into the future, can we just quickly go back to the start of your career? Because some people might not remember that you were only about 20 years old when you signed to a major label. And I don't know, I can't remember how it happened. And I certainly don't know, were you prepared for it? And did you know enough about signing a record deal when you signed a record deal?
Well, this is the 20th year of my gap year. The deal was always with my parents. Once I'd finished my A-levels, I could take a gap year. And if things looked like they were going okay, they'd happily support me in continuing that journey. Mm-hmm. And so I was really fortunate, actually. I used to put on a lot of shows in Southend at Chinnery's and got to know lots of bands who were part of the Big Scary Monsters kind of DIY touring circuit. Also included Gravity DIP, who have become Banquet Records, and was really fortunate to have had the ability to just jump in the back of any transit van that would have me for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I played about 170 shows in the first couple of years, and I don't really know how it led me to signing to a major label. But to answer your question, was I prepared? Absolutely not. It doesn't matter how prepared you think you can be to take a step like that. It doesn't matter how smart you think you are at the time or how good you are at hiding your knowledge gaps, but no, not in the slightest. The implications of it still live on now, so no, definitely not ready.
In what way? What sort of implications?
Well, I signed a contract that lasted for 25 years when I was 19 years old. So I'm still under it, and it's not, I haven't had a terrible experience. I mean, there are artists I know that have full records that never got released, or, inability to, recompense large parts of their life. I'm one of the fortunate ones in a way, but yeah, it's quite a significant decision to make at that time, and it's not like taking out a mortgage where you feel that you're secure in your environment. It's the kind of length and terms of a mortgage, but you really, I don't know how well equipped you can be at that age to do something like that.
And also coming, I suppose, as you say, coming from quite a DIY background, the way everything is done and the amount of people involved suddenly changes, doesn't it? Because all of a sudden other people have got a lot of input into what they think your career should look like, I guess.
I suppose for good and for bad, like one of the reasons that I wanted to sign to a label like Atlantic is I wanted to do, I wanted to take risks and be able to intersect with creative and artistic opportunities that I know I just wouldn't be able to afford at any other level. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to make a record with Nick and Sawney. I really wanted to do certain types of things. These are opportunities that I was fortunate to get. But then at the other side, as you say, I'd make a very simple decision one night, and then it would have to go through 10 people, and then it would come back slightly different, and we'd have a meeting about it, or other people would have a meeting about it on my behalf, and it all just... You think that increased resources makes it easier for you to act fast. And when the commercial arrow is going in the right direction, they're very agile and creative organisations, but when things maybe don't land in the same way, it becomes a lot harder to take the risks. So yeah, you really notice the behemoth scale of these labels, especially when you go and play in other places. It's quite a culture shock when you turn up to a different country and there's suddenly 6 people that are working on your record, and you're like, oh cool, like why is there no one at the gig then? But no, it's amazing. Like it's an incredible experience to have had, but it's not necessarily one that I went into with my eyes so wide open. Like my personal ideology and my DIY ideology, and also my kind of creative ambition, were really at odds with itself. I've always felt a weird sense of like my political and personal heart lies in punk rock, but my creative ambition and the music that I listen to is from a completely different lane.
And what about, in terms of when you've put out records on other labels since then, Cooking Vinyl and Extra Mile, do you find that there was more spontaneity involved in that? There may not have been, the budgets of a big label, but there are other things that you do get.
The Cooking Vinyl transition was hard because I was still quite young. It's like transitioning from, where we were at when the kind of... I don't remember like huge parts of this period of time, but I very much remember where I was when I got the call from my managers to tell me that Atlantic had called them to say that whilst they've continued to invest and support me in the making of this album, they didn't want to release it. I remember the conversations before it. I remember doing a track with Baba Mal and it being described as, why would you want to do another 7 seconds? And it's like, this is like one of the greatest artists in living history. What a joy and privilege it is to work with him. I get that it might not be corporate, or trying to do a drum and bass track with Shy FX and people being like, nah, you should look at the younger, it's, you go through all of that and then it's like, I'm sorry, we don't really like the type of risks that you're taking. They don't align with the type of risks that we want to take. And it was quite an honest and frank call, and I was lucky, I had an A&R man and people there that did genuinely care about like my artistic and creative ambition. But you go from that and speaking to someone every day and people checking in on you, and then you go to somewhere where you don't have that relationship at all. Like, people don't prepare you for A&R and its invasiveness. It's great to have that support, but like, should you really be chatting to someone for an hour every day about what you're going to do that day? I don't know, unless you're married to it's a weird kind of like odd, I don't know how to describe it. And then you go to a label like Cooking Vinyl, it's like, well, what do you want to do? And it's like, what? Well, I can actually do what I want to do? And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, but you can do what you want to do, but you got to remember that like, we ain't a corporation, so we ain't just going to throw loads of money at your random crap anymore, Sam. It's like, okay, fair enough. Like, I get this now. I get how this works. And what you really learn is that I don't know, if you come through the system as a major label artist, you don't really fully understand the difference between the independent sector and the major label sector, and also the difference between labels that are supported by the majors that act as a feeder and ones that are truly independent. And I have immense respect for, organisations, groups like what Cooking Vinyl have done, because they were pioneering. They were so far ahead of, this idea of like label services. Everyone's like, wow, we've invented this new concept of label services. I was like, oh, no. A corporation has rebranded what Cooking Vinyl do, so it is technically, seems like an invention. But they were doing it way ahead of their time, and they've brought some amazing records. And I think that understanding how that industry evolved, because, bearing in mind, the first time I signed a record deal, there was no such thing as a download. So I was the last generation of record contracts to not include the internet. So 2006, it was just about MySpace. Then it was I saw Facebook on album 2, and then on really it was a kind of streaming was the beginnings of my journey with Cooking Vinyl and understanding the difference between how the digital world looked and the physical world looked. So it's so much to navigate, but I have respect for anyone that's going to dedicate their life to the thankless task of releasing music by artists. It's hard. It's an incredibly emotional and complex process to be involved in, and to be involved in that custodianship and to do it well, it's a responsibility, and it's something that, Britain has some amazing independent labels, that really do care, and it's a wonderful thing.
It's a very good point. I will always use this as an illustration. During the periods where I was co-running Deceptive Records, and we signed, I've mentioned this before on the pod, but one of the first bands we signed was a band called Collapse Lung, and I went to see Collapse Lung at Phoenix Festival, and I stood in the crowd watching Collapse Lung, looking around and thinking, I wish people were applauding more. And I was taking it really personally, because it is a really personal thing to you. And you become so annoyed when people don't get it. And it was I just personally sort of not insulted, but just, annoyed. And then when people did applaud a song, it was like, yes, now we're getting somewhere. Actually, it struck at your very heart just because you'd put, $5,000 into helping them get a single out.
Well, you found something that you love, and you want everybody to understand why you love it. And the only tools that you have at disposal are the same tools that everybody else has to also convince people that something is worth investing their love into. But back in the day, that was, music and film and books and magazines and newspapers. But now it's everything, including the direct commodification of people's personalities. And this kind of parasocial marketing that's taking place from many types of companies. So it's even harder, I think, now to convince people to fall in love with something. So I think, I actually feel that the pain that, that you would have felt then is unfortunately echoed every time someone puts a social media post out now. It's like, I spent ages working on this, we thought about this, it's a great way. And it's like, okay, cool, like maybe I should have just fallen over, it'd have been better. It's a kind of really strange, like passionate investment in something that you absolutely fundamentally believe in, and what you've got to do to make it survive is to convince enough people that your love for it can be shared. And then that can be supported. What an unbelievably ridiculous industry to be in, independent record labels. It's every element of the music industry is baffling, but that I think is one of the hardest, because they had, everything worked. People would, it wasn't utopic, but you could have physical formats and that would support the art being made, and there was a cash flow. And then suddenly, and I noticed this at my time at Cooking Vinyl, it all disappeared. And then Extra Mile were at the beginnings of like starting to bring that back. And I think, the work that they've done with their artists, especially, earlier Frank Turner and Will Varley, and, this idea that like, if you want to believe and invest in the artists, buy the records, they've been amazing at doing that.
I mean, I remember those days. I think it sort of must have been the Cooking Vinyl days, or when I think you were one of the first artists I saw talking about streaming and talking about the impact of streaming on artists. Like, was that the time when I guess you were feeling confident enough to talk about what you were seeing and to kind of be one of those people popping their head up and saying, I'm not sure streaming is entirely good for us?
What a terrible career decision that was. if people say like, why aren't artists political? It's like, it's not a great idea to criticise the one place that you need for people to hear your music publicly in The Guardian during its inception.
Really? Was there an impact then?
I don't know. I don't know, but I've only had one Spotify playlist in the history of my time as an artist. That does feel weird, but maybe that's just coincidental. You know, Brian and the team at Spotify have always actually been quite receptive when I've met with them and had conversations with them. So it's probably me more than anything else. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's not, you know, I can't portion the blame here. But yeah, I mean, I think streaming's amazing. I just can't get beyond this reality that the bare minimum is not bare, it is too bare, isn't it? Like, we have somehow as an industry gone from being like, okay, like £6, £5 from every unit will cover the cost of making this, of doing this, of touring it, of marketing it. And now it's like, well, if you get 1 million people to listen to it, you'll have half of that. And it's like, the economics just didn't work to sustain the industry. Like, I think what gets lost in translation sometimes is it's not about just trying for one person to make a living or artists should be paid more. It's like, to do something well, you do need a team. You know, in every part of life, you need to have a support network. You need to have specialists. And for these groups of people to exist on all levels of the music industry, there needs to be mechanisms to make sure that the money that is record at the top flows down to everywhere else. And the moment I saw how streaming was working, I was like, great idea, but like, how is this going to keep the same level? Like, I think when you're a custodian of something, the bare minimum should be, it can't get worse. And it instantly felt, you know, kind of inequitable. And it felt like, you know, that the first wave of it was going to be the record shops. Then it was going to be the recording studios, you know, and everyone's like, oh, don't worry, you'll make your money in live. And it's like, well, there's only going to be a certain ticket price. I mean, I was wrong there too, you know. I didn't ever think that we'd be paying over 100 to 150 quid to get into one gig. But, you know, that has happened. But I couldn't see how it would work. And I just thought it's such a shame that there's this opportunity to do something modern and progressive that represents like our united cultural ethos as an industry, but we couldn't get the right people round the table or convince the right people. That just need to make it a little bit more equitable. You know, it would sustain, and it would allow growth, and it would actually democratise the process. And the lip service has always been that, but the reality hasn't been that.
I mean, I know we are going to talk about some of the stuff you're doing now around like policy, I guess, and around changing things. Like, was that the moment? Did you have that confidence then to sort of start, as well as making music, as well as doing your own career, to start getting engaged with how the industry works and figuring out how you could play that part in changing things? It feels like I guess you've stepped up what I think of as that work around your career since. Is that a fair point? Like, that was when you sort of said, right, I could actually do something here.
I don't know. I think my ethos changed. You know, I've always been, you know, would consider myself to have been in activist environments. You know, like, I'm from Southend-on-Sea, and, you know, my dad came over as an immigrant. So activism is ingrained. Like, you have, I think when you're a British Asian first gen, you have two options: rapid assimilation and complete surrender to the monarchy. You know, when people go, why were so many of the last Conservative government British Asians? It's like, speak to your parents, your nanas and your granddads, and understand assimilation. Or the other is like activism. And music and punk was, for me, it was like, I'd look around every gig, and even sometimes still now, and I wouldn't ever find anyone that looked like me, but there's 4 million people that look like me in the country. Like, is this a failing of culture? Is my role here to actually say, like, you can be, you know, somebody that's like me and do this? So I did a lot of stuff with Love Music, Hate Racism. You know, it was fundamental to me. It was like, if I'm lucky enough to do this, and, you know, I've got parents that, you know, that will back me in this, which I don't think is a reality for lots of people that necessarily have the same background as me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, And by support me in it, it's like not putting the pressure on. We didn't we didn't have benefactor parents, but I did have parents that were like, if you want to do this, work hard and you can do things. They had that kind of, my dad and mum had that kind of immigrant background. So, there's always been a thread that runs through the records. Like the album I did with Cooking Vinyl, the artwork that Ruben Dangor did for the front cover was very much like based around Occupy and that kind of decentralization and this idea of direct democracy. And that was always my thing, was this idea that actually things have to be a bit more direct. Like protests gets you to the table to discuss policy. Like protest and policy is how I see that kind of traction. And then on the other side of it, you have how do you make changes within your own community? And that is by being active and a part of something. And so I kind of, in Southend decided to do a bit more in that kind of realm. And then our MP got murdered. And, I'd spoken to him the day before and, I'd known Sir David Amos, both my sisters were carnival princesses, like civic servitude was like, my dad at one point was the longest serving member of Southend Hospital, is the electrician there for 45 years. Like it was ingrained in us, like Southend and like being a part of it. So I got to know him, and what I saw in that like year afterwards, especially as it was kind of just following the pandemic, was when people put their tribal sides away and focused on projects together, those projects would thrive. And it's been a change in mindset, because I just don't think that you can get everybody to agree on everything. And I'm not a centrist by any means, but it's like find the bits in the centre ground you need to protect, and then you've got freedom to move on the fringes for the things that you really care about. And for me, that's about establishing that they're, what is the base level? What is the policy that you work under? What is the threshold? Like what things in the system have give, and what things in the system don't work to support those that need it. So that's radically changed for me, because I've just believed that, and maybe it's that there will be change on the horizon, maybe not, but it's got hard. You notice it in post-pandemic, in not just in the music industry, in all industries, it's got hard for people to like sustain the things that they care about, to find enough time to nurture them.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your site will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
And is that the way you approach music? So you've kind of taken that into where you are musically, in that developing little communities is a way of building and changing something, or at least improving something for a group of people. For instance, I mean, you've been working on you bought a studio, or built a studio, didn't you? You got some people together and thought, well, how are we going to make making music easier and more practically, easier for ourselves? Well, let's get a studio.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in London, me and Jay, who I met, he was playing with, I was playing with Kate Nash over the years, so we kind of met, we came through at the same time. We had a studio in London where we'd do bits, and then I got so stuck on that treadmill, that songwriter treadmill. And unfortunately, when you meet new artists, some of them are still on that treadmill. It's like go to various different neon light, Four Cortina style box room recording studios and try and smash out a hit in 6 hours with someone you've just met, and then on to the next every day for, I got into that loop and I hated it. You know, like, especially as a solo artist, I really hated it because collaborate, you know, it's not just about collaboration, it's about bouncing ideas off someone or not having to be the well that gets mined every time you turn up for something. You know, it's difficult because, like, you almost have to create pain to have things to sing about, or you just, it's like, is there anything going on in your life at the moment? It's like, yeah, I'm perfectly happy actually. And they're like, oh, what are we going to write about? It's like, oh, that's a good point. Like, anything I can destroy. So I got out of that, and I just really, you know, not there's one phrase that I want to use, but I know that if I use it, it's going to label me. But it was about kind of seizing the means of production, you know, like as an actual metaphor for producing. Is what is the thing that we need that we can't afford elsewhere? Our big room. Everyone play together at the same time. Everyone can hear each other. You know, you can work things out and it not be so expensive that you've only got 2 days to have the big studio to do that bit. So it's just been a process over time. Reese from Youth Club had a little space down here, and me, Jay, and Reese over 6 years have basically worked on loads of stuff, and everything that we've earned, we've put straight back into it. You know, we've probably spent, quite a significant amount of money on things that I wouldn't necessarily have considered artistic expenses. Radiators, you know, changing the electrics, you know, the lights, or, you know, everything right the way through to having to replace toilets and kitchens. But what it's settled as now is a place where people can turn up and just make some noise. You know, I was fortunate to make a record there with Deli Sasimi. You know, it was a legend. One of them, like, my absolute favourite artist to see. His lineage is huge. And we talked for ages. I was like, just come down, we'll see what happens. So we just got a bunch of people together and we saw what happened. You know, we've had the Boxer Rebellion, kind of, I love that band. They're such an important band for Essex as well. Like, they symbolise something for me about, you know, Northwest Essex that I don't understand. I can connect it through them. And so they've been down doing stuff and they're working on it. And I think people that just, like, love to just make music together and hang out and do things are able to utilise a space like this in a different way. And I've always dreamt of there being a place where you could just go somewhere and everything's set up, or it takes an hour to set up and then you can just record the whole thing.
Is that idea of, like, a studio? I guess it's a physical space and it's kit and hardware, but the idea of a studio being a community of musicians and being a place people can come in, that's really fascinating to me always. When I think about studios, it's not just about what's there; it's about who's there and how they interact.
It's fundamental to me. Like, I'm really lucky. You know, I love music. I love music history. So when I get to go to a studio where something significant's happened, like, I love to just, like, look at it. You know, when I was in Chicago on tour, I wrote to Wilco and just said, I know this is really strange, but our studios are very similar size to you. Can I have an hour and just come and see how it's wired? And I was lucky. I got to spend 4 hours in the loft, like, you know, one of my favourite bands ever, just looking at how everything was patched. And I'd look at things and be like, okay, cool. Like, you made that record on something that is equally, like, sellotape together. Cool. We're good. Like, obviously the equipment's good, but it's the soul. Like, you need to go somewhere. And if you're lucky to have paid to go to a great studio, you suddenly go, what am I paying for? Environment, you know, like, sports psychology is a massive one for me, because football got better when people started to realise that footballers were human beings and started to go, well, if they're healthy and happy, they'll play better. And I think the music should really learn from that approach, you know, that the environment that you make music in is going to affect what you do, whether you like it or not. If you feel the clock, you feel the pressure, you feel that, you know, it's like almost being on the meter. There's no way you're going to play as good as you think if you can spill a cup of coffee on the floor and just, if it doesn't work out, it's all right to go home.
Well, it's almost an investment in freedom, isn't it? Artistic freedom. That's what this money that you worked hard and put into the studio, that's what it buys you.
I think this is why you are one of the best broadcasters of your generation and the spokesperson for the industry, because I spent about 5 minutes talking it and you just nailed it. That's exactly what it is. It's an investment in freedom.
Yeah. That's very kind of you. It's not true, but it's very kind of you. But I mean, I suppose I think what both me and Stuart have been driving at is, and one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is, it's about finding different ways of being a musician and being a creative at a time where not always, sometimes you'll be a fit for the industry and sometimes you won't. But when you're not, how do you work around it? And what new ideas can you come up with? Because obviously the industry is evolving all the time. It's not like we're going to stop here, is it, in terms of, technology and how we consume music? But you've come up with some interesting, what some would say absolutely crackers ideas, but in a way they're the sort of things which engage with fans in a way that your bog standard delivery of music these days wouldn't. For instance, this is the point where I have to ask about the 3D printed sculpture. Now, tell us about this.
Well, I've been lucky enough to release some records on Alcopop, and I think anybody that that knows Alcopop knows that they do amazing things that are just completely bizarre. We released 150 Get Cape tracks stitched inside a Lucha Libre wrestling mask. And it was promoted, we got Kurt Angle to come and promote it, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think what I'm really fascinated by is this concept of how we escape the race to multiple formats. Right. I think that I remember the multiple formats dance the first time round when it came to records, where you'd be like 4 different versions and the A-side would be the same. You'd get a different remix on each. Kind of made sense, in terms of Clubland, it kind of worked. And, I think that there are labels that really thrived within that. But now it's like people are going, oh, it's amazing. Isn't it great that CD sales are up? It's because loads of artists are releasing 6 different versions of the same CD. And they're being bought by people that don't have CD players. And it's a race for the charts, and it's a gamification of that culture, and I get it. It's always existed. But fans wanting to invest in something doesn't necessarily need to be about buying a physical unit of music. It can be about something that sits adjacent to a physical piece of music, or a digital piece of music that says, this unlocks the music that you've bought. And it is artwork, but it's not necessarily in the traditional format. Because, NFC technology, where if you tap something against your phone, you can unlock something. But if you don't have the physical unit, you can't do that. That's exactly the same as having a record you put on a turntable. If you haven't got a turntable, you still have that interaction, you have that thing. It's an interesting experiment for me, because you look at, I'm always going to refer things to either wrestling or sports, because I don't know, I think the communality of that many people getting together to do stuff is also what music is, Yeah. And if you love something that much, you're going to get it tattooed, or you're going to buy a shirt and wear it in public. Like, it's the same thing. Baseball, they do bobblehead day. You go on a certain day of the year, you get a bobblehead. Like, I just much prefer the idea of having collectibles or sculptures or things that relate to a phase or an area of music, a release schedule, and it not just being about having 10 versions of the same record. It's like, if it needs to fall within that remit. And I think that the Serenade thing's really interesting to me. 3D printing technology is really interesting to me, because if this existed 10 years ago, like, I would have, especially if as on with a label backing, I'd have gone absolutely potty for it, to be honest, because it's like you can make collectibles that unlock unique bits of music, and then you can, if you've got that key, you can go into the safe and listen to new stuff when it's available. Like, that to me sounds so exciting and so creative, and I wanted to start a relationship of trying to understand how a future might look like, where there will always be a vinyl version, and it will be the best sounding vinyl that is possible to do at that point, with the best artwork that we can afford. There will always try to be a CD version, but I don't really want to get into the habit of doing 4 different versions of the same thing. If there's something new that can exist in its own place, maybe it will have new technology to unlock it. And that was the experiment. I wanted to put out 4 tunes that were directly about this moment in time. Can I landlock it for 2 weeks? Everyone said, if you put something on the streaming service, you won't be able to take it down. This won't work with streaming. That was the advice from everybody. Or you need to do a deal with a distributor, and you're not going to be able to just upload it and take it down. So it was the only way to do it, to landlock it, was to landlock it to something physical. And, you know, the song's about, you know, monopolies and oligopolies. You know, it's the lead track from the EP. So getting a local 3D printer to make some looks, you know, I melted a Monopoly house with a lighter and just said, can you make a 2-inch version of this? And then I want to try and put some music in it. And somehow everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And within like 7 days it was done, you know? And then it came out and it disappeared and it was fun.
It's the key thing here, though. Like, there were two things that really, really I love about this. One is the creative endeavor of making it. You were doing something creative and making something cool. And the other was that you're trying to give people who buy it something good. Whereas at some of the times, like when I think back to when NFTs were all the rage a couple of years ago, and a lot of it was like, well, we'll sell you a picture and there's nothing else. And we'll just try and get some money out of you. But it sounds like what you're doing is going, how can I make something really creatively cool? But also you're not trying to fleece people and rinse them of their cash. You're trying to give them good stuff. Like, that feels important at the moment.
Well, it's hard because you have to do something that you have to invest in the concept of making the thing that works, and then you have to find the technology that it interfaces with. But I love those kind of puzzles and those kind of challenges. You know, in an ideal world, you know, and if you see just my studio or, you know, wherever I am, there's just, I love like weird merch. Like, I love it. I just love it. I just think it's just the things that people make and the things that you go, someone's come up with that, and there's maybe 400 people in the world that think that's cool, and I'm one of them, so let's buy it. I love that kind of stuff because, you know, I can see in the background of one of your backdrops, like the iconography of design of things that you care about. You know, you still have it in your house. It represents you. It connects you to those moments. And I love the idea that you can think outside the box and find different ways. I mean, it definitely won't be me that does it, but I'm sure at some point there will be people showing their record collection, and it'll be a whole variety of different sculptures and figures and things like that, you know. And it will unlock a digital realm of music. You can get it with kids' stories. You know, you've got those boxes where you buy the figure from the film and you put it on the box and it plays it. You know, that technology exists, you know. And my sister works for one of the companies that does that, and just talking to her about it, and she's like, yeah, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? Like, before, things would just be available, and now you can lock them so everybody gets remunerated, but it's not cheap and tacky. It's still a meaningful object.
Yeah, very much. I mean, this is, if anyone else is going to do it, you can bet it's probably going to be somebody like Flaming Lips, isn't it? Who've released music on memory sticks inside gummy skeletons and stuff. You know, that's inside the minds of Wayne Coyne from Flaming Lips. That's very much in his ballpark, I think, isn't it?
One day I'd love to go to a shop and buy in a packet a mystery record. Could be one of 20 artists. It could be like you get a strand of Wayne Coyne's hair that's turned into a little unicorn figure, or you could end up with a handwritten book inside. You know, this idea that you can use all of the collectible culture that exists in Funko Pops and everything like that, and intersect that with a digital realm that works with music is super exciting to me. I love the Flaming Lips. I've got so much Flaming Lips nonsense. You know, there's very poor decisions I've made over time, but I also still have the Santa hat from when we supported them and got to go up on stage with them. So, I'm always going to love people that do weird things like that, because life should be built on the texture of people that do completely abstract things.
My daughter was saying the other day, she's going through a phase where, I mean, she can learn lyrics of a song within 24 hours, and will be able to sing that song to you without reading the lyrics. And we were walking along the other day, and she had, bless her, she's got a self-esteem T-shirt, and she was talking about the current self-esteem track, which does, we've managed to find the radio edit version of it, because it is loaded with slightly fruity language. But she was saying, wouldn't it be brilliant if, and she said, this is what I want. I'd like a T-shirt, which, when you read the lyrics they come up on Spotify. I want a T-shirt that does that, where the lyrics light up with each line that with each line of the song as you arrive at it. And I was thinking, if somebody's not done that already, there's the future right there. So
you
can have that one, Sam.
Well, I was going to say, did you patent that before you told the whole industry of this potentially game-changing idea that could have stayed in the family?
I think if we put a recording of this show in an envelope and send it to a lawyer, this counts as registering the patent. Is that right? I'm a bit hazy on legals, but I'm fairly sure that's right.
I'm looking forward to the next time you tour and going up to your merch stand. Talking of which, you mentioned earlier on about when the music industry basically deferred the responsibility of paying its artists by saying it's fine because you'll get paid when you go out and play live. And as we know, that's changed so much in the course of the last 5 or 6 years. But there is, I think, amongst some people, there's still this idea that live music is where people go to be paid. But the situation is completely different now, unless you're right at the top end. But you've done some, because you're a supporter of something which, I should probably say I'm an ambassador, I think, the Music Venue Trust, which is the organisation that represents grassroots venues. But that it's such an important part of the musical landscape now in terms of, if nothing else, access. Because we've already talked about, if you don't have a certain amount of money or clout, then trying to make your way through the music industry is difficult. But it's even worse if you can't get on a stage.
Well, it's so close to home for me. The idea of grassroots music venues. I think in particular because I started. It was the first 2 gigs I did at a local community council community centre, and then that shut down, and then it kind of evolved into putting on shows at Chinnery's. And it was the simple economics of, if we put on a show at Chinnery's and we make this amount of money, this can pay for the rehearsal room, this can help. It was a way of understanding the connected ecosystem of how to be able to afford to make music. It's always been that, and I think it's always been that in every community. Like, when an artist or a band wants to have a career in live music, the first thing is working out how that's affordable. And sometimes the best way to do that is to find your local venue, headline it, sell it out, keep the money, reinvest it until you're able to then grow that around the regions. It's not just the lifeblood, it is the safe space, it is the bastion. Like, if you wanted to have green hair 20 years ago, there would be 3 or 4 places in every town or city that you could go to and it would be alright. Now it's okay, like, we're in a slightly more aesthetically open society where you could have green hair and work at the bank and it's fine. You're not going to scare anyone. But those kind of bastions of alternative lifestyle choices and what embodies the core of alternative culture, which I think Britain is, if you want to talk about brand Britain, alternative culture, music, comedy, independent film, visual arts, street art, like, these things came from there being bedrocks of alternative fundamentals, and they were all led from venues and pubs and clubs that were the place that you could go to hear stuff, to meet people, to feel connected to it. And then if you wanted to go and do it elsewhere, you could, but everyone had that access point. And I think sometimes as a music industry we get so lost in the idea that it's all about the artist. It's not. Music is all about the community of musicians and friends and family and fans and labels and promoters. It's everything, everyone. But if you're going to put one person at the very core of it, it's the fan, because we should all be fans. If we're not fans, like, we should just find jobs in, like, better industries that don't require you to have immense dedication for less money. Like, let the skills that don't care that much about music go, and there's other things that you can work in. Like, music's it's a fan industry. It should be. But the fans, there is no £5 billion in the economy if there isn't somebody taking the money they've earned elsewhere and giving it to the sector. So, I've always seen that starts on your doorstep and then it grows to be something else. And I'm lucky that, John Hannon had a studio in Southend, like, people that were bastions of, grassroots culture and mindset. I was lucky to learn from them when I was like 15, 16, 17, and I was weird. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like I know I've eaten a lot since, but I was like tiny, and I was, very scrawny and weird. And like going to like adults and just asking them questions, and everyone came back with answers and helped me. And I just think that is the bedrock. You can argue that some things will come straight through TikTok. Cool. Some things will come straight to the charts and to radio before. No problem. But I just think that it's home. Like, it's home for people that love music, is that place that you go to hear it, or that place that you go after you've gone to hear it somewhere else. It's the safe space. It is the flag waver for these kind of people that exist, and there are millions of them across the country.
I think it's a really good point. By the way, I did love the fact when you mentioned the green hair. And myself and Stuart were both furiously nodding. Two people who have never had green hair in their lives.
Oh, by contrast, when I was 18, I had green hair, and I could go to the waterfront. I had a big green streak and blonde hair, but I could go to the waterfront in Norwich, the art centre in Norwich. And to your exact point, I couldn't go to Ritzy's in Norwich instead with green hair, because I would have been
and you had the ferry boat as well, which was the green hair pub I remember in Norwich. That was a hell of a place.
I'll
find a photo, Steve, and you can see it.
I will. But it's an absolute. It's. I mean, the point is spot on. When I first went to Harlow to study journalism, and through the 80s, it was very much the youth was split, and there was a point around the late 80s, early 90s, where there was a feud between the casuals and the Fraggles. And the Fraggles were everyone who liked, Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine, the Mega City 4. And they had nowhere to go that, as you say, was a safe space, except the square, the venue, the square in Harlow, which was the place where I ended up going all the time when I arrived in Harlow to, spend my year there at college. And there was nothing else. I didn't know anyone. But I walked in there to see a gig, and then just spent virtually a year going there 2 or 3 times a week. And that's where my education comes from. And so many things I learned, I've said this before, but so many things I learned about music, and literature, film and politics, all comes from the conversations I had with the people who built the community within that building.
And what's incredible about it is that it is you both mentioned spaces that have relationships to municipalities. The investment that, the local councils had before to, the Harlow Square and, the waterfront in Norwich, they had government and council support to help them work, because they understood the importance of providing a facility like that within those areas to sustain that inquisition. And the fact that that was an open space of democracy that then led people to go on and to continue to question and continue to advocate for things that are important. That is long-term social infrastructure. And when the budgets got slashed for the councils and even the independent spaces, it was the MVT that took up that mantle and said, these places are vital, we need to protect them. I think when you lose the municipal spaces and then you lose the independent spaces, soon you're left with no spaces. And there are far too many people that are within the music industry that I've met that have had their direct education from a venue, from the Cavern in Exeter, from, TJ's or Le Pub in Newport, from Club Iffaback, from King Tut's, from Rock City. Like, the industry is built on people that had their moments where they went, wow, this is what I think, and this tribe of people are also thinking the same as me, like, let's do something cool together.
I mean, that leads us on quite nicely then in terms of how do you explain this to people, and how do you explain the importance of investment in these places to this. There has been some talk recently, and it's come up 1 or 2 times. I think it might have even been mentioned during the CMS committee into grassroots venues, but this idea of a possible fan-led review of music, which will help inform and teach and give us the stats and the opinions that we need to move forward with where the music industry could go. Do you think that's? I mean, I think you're a supporter of the idea. I think, aren't you, of a fan-led review?
I'm a massive supporter of it. I think first things first. To take it back to where football was at before, the inquiries into the fan-led review of music. England were doing really badly. The FA had, got money from the Premier League to put into St George's Park to kind of develop elite talent. But then as broadcast revenues increased, it was clear that the pyramid in football was becoming disjointed and there needed to be a better redistribution of finance. What the fan-led review is able to do is able to evidence what parts of the fan intersection between being a football fan and being, a consumer of the football industry, like where the balance of equity sits. Where were the fans being exploited? Where were there holes in communities? Where were, there was a phrase that kept getting used called the hollowing out, which is where if you get relegated a couple of rungs down the ladder and the money disappears and then suddenly all those jobs are lost and the community influence is lost and there's a hole there. It's a hollowing out of a community. So the fan-led review of football was there to kind of make sure that fans had a say, because the industry had got so big that fans didn't have a say. But fans had the Football Supporters Association, had loads of different levels that they could intersect, but they needed that soft power to become something tangible and meaningful. In the music industry, if you're a fan, where do you complain? If you get ripped off by a dodgy, your option is make some noise on social media and hope someone gets back to you. For an industry that is so huge in terms of, the government see it as a growth priority industry, do we know what the fans think? So I set about doing some research to uncover every major piece of music industry research since the pandemic. And under 15% of it was fan-facing. There's loads about how we all feel as practitioners and how we all feel about it, but how do we know what the audiences think? And the logic has always been, well, fans are paying for it, so therefore they support it. But anecdotally, it doesn't tally. And in terms of, where the money is shifting around in the industry, it doesn't necessarily protect the grassroots or the independent in the same way. So it does, how do fans think about that? How do fans think about charges on tickets, secondary ticketing? All of these things that the industry discusses at length. There's no actual group of people or evidence base that we can say this is what the audience thinks.
I get quite a lot of press releases when someone's lobbying for something. I say, "Oh, and we surveyed 500 fans, and they agree with this." Fancy that! And that's like 80% of the fan research I see is someone's done it for a press release to say the fans support whatever we're asking politicians to do.
And it's amazing. It's incredible that we can exist on an industry where 500 people supporting something is a significant piece of research. We did a poll related to Southend United and we got double that in Southend about football. It blows my mind. The fan-led review, the Tracy Crouch fan-led review survey had 20,000 people fill it out within a week. It was enough to be representative to start the terms of reference for much more in-depth further research.
Sorry, Sam. Would it include? So it would run the whole gamut, would it, of asking people, I suppose, what's important to them, how much, what prices they see as being fair, I guess. Opinions about secondary ticketing. I mean, there'll be an awful lot to fit in because music is such a big world now. There's so many questions to ask. You'd have to edit it down, wouldn't you? Otherwise, it's going to take you. I mean, it would take me 5 hours to fill this in.
Well, that's the point. I think it's about the first survey actually finds out what are the core hot button issues that do affect the audience. You shape the terms of reference by working out what's important, and then you use that to narrow the research. And what you're looking for is you're looking for trends where things are increasingly problematic, which I think the CMS committees have done on 2 different subjects, on remuneration, but also on, grassroots music venues. And The fan-led review is one of those recommendations, along with a very firm recommendation on a contribution of £1 from every major stadium and arena gig to go towards supporting a fund that looks after and protects the grassroots, akin to the Football Foundation. The research, the evidence base for loads of this is already in place at a government level. It's about narrowing it down specifically to what areas of further investigation are needed, so the industry can make a decision as to whether it wants to run the gauntlet of potential reforms or whether it wants to be proactive like other industries and lead in making it a more holistic and equitable place for everybody to exist in.
And that, I think, brings us almost to the end. I have to ask, though, is that your studio you're in? Is that where... Because it looks like there's a bit of kit around, but then at the same time, it could also be a teenager's bedroom. So that's what I'm saying.
I think that's part of its charm.
Which leads me to what are you up to musically? You mentioned a couple of things which you've been doing. What have you got in the pipeline? And if people want to look up what you've put out recently, where do they go?
To look up recently, I suppose the most recent thing that I'd love people to listen to is a record with Delish Assimi and the Estuary 21. It's called The Confluence. That's an album that I just love. I loved making it, I love listening to it. It's where my heart is. So if that's something that people want to check out. And what's next is it's time for me to make a Get Cape record. It's been 6 years. I've got the songs together. Like one of the reasons to do those houses was to kind of just test the water and see how I feel about, playing some music and doing some bits. So yeah, I guess for the short term, it's going to be a case of being, locked away, beavering away, finishing it off. But I'm quite excited to kind of get back into a world of releasing music with a completely different headspace and mindset to that I've ever been in before. It's quite an exciting proposition.
And if you want to look up that record, try rather than going straight to the streaming services, head to Bandcamp. Because it's on Bandcamp, isn't it? We've become big fans of Bandcamp, haven't we? Recently, a lot of listeners have been endorsing Bandcamp.
Its editorial's wicked as well. Like you can take a recommendation from Bandcamp, and it's going to be a record that you want to buy.
Yeah.
I've been down
love
some
it.
real rabbit holes on Bandcamp where they had a blog post about some genre that I've never heard of before. And yeah, within an hour, your wallet's out, and you're buying things that you never would have encountered otherwise.
But isn't that the magic? That's what we got to reconnect with on all levels. That was the beauty of record shops, and now it's always been about specialists and recommendations and how on earth did I fall in love with this, and why do I now need to tell everybody about it? And yeah, Bandcamp's wicked for that.
Sam, thank you very much for your time and also for saying kind things about us on social media, which is very kind of you. Thank you very much, Sam. Take care and good luck in the future.
Thank you.
That's Sam Duckworth, who we spoke to the other week, and I don't know, Sam has, as you've probably worked out for yourself over the course of the last 40-odd minutes, he's got a very analytical mind, and the spirit, the DIY spirit burns deep inside his soul. Thank you very much again to Sam, and thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed the show, I know I always say this, but please do subscribe in your podcast app and give us a review and a rating so we can reach some more people with our words of wisdom. You can also support the show through our Patreon page at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. And if you have a question which you'd like answered on the show, email us with your queries. Anything you've never understood about the finances or workings of the music industry, just email us at thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, cheerio.